In this video I will dismantle the miter saw arm that I used in a previous video to make a table saw, and I will install there a new 1200 watts circular saw. When I made my first table saw using a smaller circular saw, I never had any problem, but with this one it turns out that I don't get a perfectly vertical disc. I think that the problem is that the electric motor is too heavy, and it tilts the disc in that direction. I can fix this using a homemade table saw lift, but I will install it in another video. The problem with the miter saw arm was that it was impossible to me to set the disc vertical and parallel to the fence. When I turn the disc, it wobbles, like if the shaft of the motor were not perfectly straight. One may think it is not too much, but it is a big problem when I try to make precise cuts with the saw. In this video I will show you how I mounted my circular saw with the discs parallel to my sliding fence. The first thing to do is to dismantle the miter saw arm and the homemade table saw lift. And now I will mount there my circular saw. I will use the same system I used in the video how to make a homemade table saw with the circular saw that you can watch if you click in the miniature. To hold the saw I will use 4 bolts and 4 self-locking nuts, so I drill 4 holes in the base of my circular saw and I file the bar in the other side of the holes. I make sure that the bolts don't go loose in the holes, they should fit nice. I don't want the disc guard to get in the way, so I use some tape to hold it open. I make sure that the disc and the base are at 90 degrees angle. If necessary, we can loosen the nut that holds the adjusting screw, and we adjust the angle between the disc and the base. I had to turn the screw until the piece of sheet that holds the screw touches the base of the saw. And now I tighten again the nut that keeps the screw in place. I present my saw in the position I want it to be. I turn it 180 degrees to one side, and I also turn the board 180 degrees to that side. I put the saw on the hole I have in the board, in such a way that I can tilt the disc to make 45 degrees cuts, but for the moment I am not sure I can use it like that when I install the table saw lift. I put a couple of boards below. One of these boards will help to avoid tear out when I drill the bolt holes in the plywood board. I turn the plywood board, and very carefully I contour bore the holes to accommodate the bolt's head, because the bolt's head must not protrude the plywood surface. That's right, I insert the bolt's head gently. The first bolt goes through the corresponding hole in the saw base, and I hold the saw with a spring clamp. If the bolt fits tight in the hole in the metallic base, the spring clamp holds the saw without any problem. I release the depth stop and I move the disc down to have a better access to put the self-locking nut. If I turn the plywood board, it is easier to tighten the nut. I put the plywood board in place and I screw it to the table frame. And I lift the saw disc. I must adjust the saw position, so I have to pivot the saw on the bolt until the disc is perfectly parallel to the fence. I pivot the saw on the bolt. And I turn the disc to check the position. until I think I cannot do better. Now I use a clamp to hold the base in that position, making sure I didn't move the saw. And I move the fence away. I unscrew and I turn the plywood board. I put the two bars below it, and I drill the remaining bolt holes in the plywood board. And I counterbore the holes in the top. I put the bolts in place. And I tighten the self-locking nuts. When I tighten the nuts, the bolt's head gets inside the counterbores. I don't need to hammer them. I have one hand in the other side of the board, making sure that the bolt's head are not protruding the board surface. Now I can remove the spring clamp. I turn the plywood board, and now I can remove that clamp. One possibility is to lift the disc by hand, but as I mentioned before, to keep the disc perfectly vertical, I need to install my homemade table saw lift. When I recorded this video, I was not sure if I could install the lift and keep the possibility of tilting the disc, but I have never needed to make 45 degrees cuts. Now I will make the vertical cut in my table saw insert. I put everything in place. I turn the board and I put another bar below it to avoid tear out. I hold everything using a couple of clamps and I cut the slot for the blade. I must make sure I don't tilt the disc and I don't move it side to side while I push the saw cutting the slot. I will put two bars below the plywood to make it stiffer, but I have to avoid the electric motor. I mark the position on the table crossbars, making sure I avoid the saw base too. Now I put the bars in place, and I mark where to cut them. A couple of screws to each side are enough to secure each board. Sometimes the drill runs out of use, and it needs some help. Finally, I can put the plywood board in place, and I screw it to the table frame. And I use it for the first time. Everything seems to be okay. But when I check the cut, I can see that the vertical cut is not at 90 degrees. I think I can fix that when I install my homemade table saw lift. So in the next video I will show how I install it. You can find my woodworking videos in my YouTube channel. And if you like my videos, remember that you can subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.